For thousands of years, elders and knowledge keepers have used stories to educate future generations. Stories and words can help heal our hearts and make Mother Earth a better place for all people. This is Healing Hearts.
Hello everyone, welcome to Healing Hearts. I'm Tracy Koga. Education. Well, it used to mean reading, writing, and arithmetic. Now it means so much more. And is it really education for all? Tonight we'll be discussing the education system and how it has an effect on Indigenous and Newcomer communities. Healing Hearts starts now. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing Hearts. I have a very distinguished and incredible panel of guests tonight. We are talking about education. I want to first welcome, because I can just see it on my squares in the Zoom gallery. Hi, Kathleen Vyrauen from IPW, and you're part of the Secretariat for the Newcomer Education Coalition. I definitely want to hear all about the programs and the things that you're working on. I see Connie Wyatt Anderson, the teacher extraordinaire up north in the PAW. And I'm sure you've got stories too as well. And as well, my very dear friend, Lynda Baxter, and my former teacher too, as I confess. She is joining us. And Lynda, I've keyed you as an education advocate, because I really truly feel that you are in all of your ways, yes. And last but definitely not least, Lisa, Aymont, Hunter, welcome so much. You know what, I even have to cheat on my notes, but I think I've got it. Indigenous Community and Culture Support Worker. Did I get that right? Okay, that's the first and last time I'm going to say that one, but you are, again, an incredible part of the River East Transcona School Division, and definitely want to hear all about your story. So I'm going to start with Kathleen, because you're with IPW, and we are in partnership, this show Healing Hearts, and our whole mandate is to hear at the shared lived experiences of Indigenous and Newcomer communities. And tonight we're talking about education. So Kathleen, let's talk then about the organization that you work with and the kind of work that you've been doing for education.
For sure. So, like you mentioned, I represent both Immigration Partnership Winnipeg as well as the Newcomer Education Coalition. So the way that IPW is structured, we are a project-based organization. So we don't do direct frontline services. We offer sort of a facilitation of bringing together partners within the sector to talk about or address issues and barriers that come up for the newcomer, immigrant, and refugee community, as well as wanting to build bridges between marginalized communities, such as the Indigenous community and racialized communities. So one of the areas that IPW tackles is education. And one thing we hear a lot from our communities in the racialized area is that education within our current system that we have right now, and then as well as with these new changes that are being that are coming through Bill 64, is that there is a real concern about what the effects of those will have, as well as what the current system is doing for racialized communities right now. So the Newcomer Education Coalition is a group of advocates that have come together from the community. They represent different ethnocultural communities, they represent parents, teachers, school administrators, we have school superintendents that are part of it as well. So we're working from within the system as well as within the community to address barriers like curriculum development. We address things like older youth with interrupted schooling. What are barriers that they have? Language barriers, things like trauma and mental health. How does that affect learning of these students as well? So we have been a coalition for around, I want to say almost 6 to 7 years. Wow. I am the co-chair of that coalition. So I help sort of lead those, our membership is mighty with very strong advocates that are always looking to ensure that our racialized communities are getting the best out of their education in that K-12 system here in Manitoba. So yes, we've really been working to address that, and IPW has always been a partner in that coalition. So I'm sort of bridging that gap between the two, and helping with the partnerships that IPW can bring through the coalition as well to address those barriers on a whole.
What have you seen then, Kathleen, through the 6 or 7 years that the coalition has been working? What have you seen as the main issues for newcomers in education?
So we have 6 key priority areas that we look at as a coalition. One is parental involvement. So how do we advocate or empower newcomer parents to be actively involved in their children's education? We hear from schools saying that, we phone parents to come in for parent-teacher conferences. They don't answer their phone. They don't come in. But then we ask the questions, well, then why? Are you understanding that there may be a language barriers? Are you sending home notes in translated or interpreted languages that they may understand? Are you understanding that newcomer parents have a lot of barriers that they need to overcome in terms of maybe they're going to classes in the evening and they're not available to come into parent-teacher conferences. Maybe they don't understand the curriculum or the homework that you're sending home for their children to do. So are those youth getting supports at home, but maybe the parents don't know how to support their children in the homework that they're being sent home. So we look at what those barriers are that parents may be facing in becoming actively involved in their children's education. And then we work with school divisions and teachers and even within the classroom to address those barriers and have parents feel more empowered to become actively involved in their children's education. With Bill 64, that's something that we're hearing a lot about, this new parent involvement. So we ask the question, how are you going to empower newcomer parents to become part of those parent councils? How are you going to be accommodating to things like language barriers, to child minding that may need to happen during meetings and things like that? So that is one issue. Interrupted schooling, understanding that youth that are coming from trauma backgrounds or war-affected backgrounds may enter school at an older age. So right now, the current age they can stay in school is till 21, but oftentimes it doesn't happen at 18. Schools are very heavy to push students out. So how can those students that are coming in with 4-5 years of interrupted schooling due to war and conflict, when they're coming into our education system, they have maybe a year or 2 to play catch up, learn a brand new language, get 30 high school credits, and graduate. Are they ready once they graduate to enter post-secondary or enter the job force? Are they entering the job force at minimum wage jobs that they're going to end up cycled into? So we look at what those barriers are for those older youth, and again, wanting to address those. And I'll just do one more because I don't have time, but the last thing that we really focus on is research and data collection. What we find is within each key priority area, anytime you have a barrier issue that comes up, people want to know facts, they want to know numbers, they want to know, okay, well, show me the proof of it. Oftentimes those numbers, one, either aren't collected, that data isn't collected, lived experience isn't translated into data that can be used, or the data isn't accessible. It's there, but the public can't have access to it to use it. So what the coalition does is we create research projects that will address the need for that data collection in ways that the community wants it. And then we will create those research projects and work with very community-minded academics from universities and create those research projects. So those are just a few of what the coalition does, and IPW is always part of those projects as well.
Well, fantastic. And not a lot of people know the work that's being done behind the scenes. So it feels a little bit better that some concerns are being addressed. So I'm going to go to way out in the paw, but you're not really in the paw. You're somewhere outside of, even more secluded. But welcome, Connie, and your background, I guess a teacher, but you're a curriculum developer, but teaching where you are at, on the ground. Okay, let's start at the beginning, how you got there, and what you've seen so far, and then go into what these last 16, 17, 18 months have been virtual.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, everybody. Thank you. I'm joining you today from the Carrot Valley, which is just west of the Paw. It's a farming district. My teaching career was on the adjacent Pasquia Cree Nation. The Paw is really a tri-community. We have a farming community, we have the town of the Paw, and we have the Pasquia Cree Nation, which is on the north side of the Saskatchewan River. So we're all huddled together in a unique grouping here in the Paw. I came up here to teach right out of university in '92, and like most people, I planned on staying till Christmas, and it's turned into a little bit longer. And it's been a fantastic journey in many, many ways. My teaching career was on the Pasquia Cree Nation Cree community here, so my students were all Cree. So you start off teaching, you're 23 years old, you grab the official textbook. I'm a history and geography teacher by trade. And you slide it across the desk and look at a whole class of grade 11 Cree kids. And within minutes, I found myself bristling, feeling a bit weird. Teaching is an art and a science. You rely a lot on your gut, right? And nowhere in the textbook did I see my students' history. Nowhere in the textbook did I see my students' story. Did I see my students' voices? I'm not vilifying the textbook authors. I want to say that. Textbooks and curricula are a product of your time, just like my hair when I graduated high school in the late 80s. But it was an avenue for me to create space. A curriculum, and everybody talks about curriculum. A curriculum is not a prescription. A curriculum is a recipe. You're the cook. You're the chef. It's your job to cook it. So I learned that very, very quickly, especially teaching something like Canadian history. I mean, the whole point of Canadian history is to make citizens, whether they're citizens of your First Nations community, your country, citizens with care, citizens with a sense of praxis. So my goal then was to find these little gaps and find my kids' place in that area, relying on oral tradition, relying on the land, relying on the Cree language, which I don't speak, relying on the community to help me in this journey. So I started there. I've been very lucky outside of teaching as well. You mentioned I'm a curriculum developer. I've worked over the last several years for Canadian Geographic for years. I sat on National Geographic's board as a representative from Canada. And probably the last decade with treaty education here in Manitoba. Me and a fellow co-writer designed and wrote the initiative to bring treaty education to Manitoba schools. Probably the turning point, you said 18 months. I'd say the turning point in many ways was 2015, the calls to action, because it gave people a concerted impetus to do something. It let you look in and it let you look out. And in education, I see large changes in a small amount of time. Education is an amorphous mass that moves very, very, very slowly. But never forget, change happens from a legislative capacity, but I'm a firm believer that the biggest changes happen across a teacher's desk, without a doubt. And it's in the community of learners with which they work. This is why I think teacher training is so imperative. And I will say, with the Manitoba Education Review, one of my most disappointing things was its lack of focus on teacher training. Again, we can talk about curriculum. I can take that allrecipes.com, really terrible recipe, and knock it out of the park with a little bit of garlic. A good teacher can do that as well. But I'm always worried about how we're training and supporting our pre-service and in-service teachers. And I really think that's a call to action in our own community right now, especially where I am. I will say one thing before I quit blabbering. Here in Manitoba, once you are licensed to teach, you are licensed to teach anything. I told you my background is history and geography, both from a pedagogical, but also from a study point. By law, I could teach grade 12 physics, which everybody should be chuckling right now. So at all times, you know what we're doing? We're teaching the public, we're teaching our kids, we're teaching our parents, and we're supporting and teaching our teachers. So it's a great time to be a teacher. I'm going to quote a good friend of mine, Dr. Elder Harry Bone. We're very lucky to be living right now. The door is open, opportunities abound, much more than even several years ago. So it's a great time to be involved in education.
Oh, well, Connie, I want to ask. I mean, you talked about how you looked at those kids and there is nothing in the history books about their past and their history. What is the impact that you have made on those kids? And I don't, probably hundreds of kids, right, that you've taught throughout the years.
I hope, and you don't want to be, I hope I created a space for them to feel part of this tapestry that we live in, whether it's this historical, contemporary, and a place to value the knowledge that their communities have, whether it's traditional ecological knowledge, whether it's oral history, you know. So I hope, and you realize now, when you start teaching high school in your 20s, I have students who are in their 40s now. I've had students who have worked for CBC. I've had students all over now. And they are bringing forth maybe the courage, I'm hoping, have the courage to belong in this country. I mean, we are only richer by learning from our neighbors. I mean, we are an interesting community in the fall. The river is a figurative and a literal divide. And we have tried for years in this community to strengthen these bridges. And I have a firm belief in the youth, absolutely. I always used to tell the kids, it sounds trite and it sounds cheesy, but it's not. Right now across this province, there are desks, very soon I hope, full of kids. In 20 years, they're moving their desk chair, you know, in grade 11, and they're sitting in a legislature. They're sitting in a panel like this. They're making big decisions, and they're carrying the knowledge that started in a grade 11 history class, and a grade 2 phys ed class, and a grade 10 art class.
No, I mean, it definitely, education has played a big role in everybody's life, and I guess nobody knows that better than my favorite teacher, Lynda Baxter. She chuckles. Yes, yeah, we got reacquainted. I'm going, Mrs. Baxter? So, Lynda, I brought you here tonight not only because of your experience as a teacher, principal, everything else, but a real education advocate. And I know you go back, but I want to start now. What do you see that needs to be changed in our education system? We know now, living through a pandemic, virtual learning, and all of the ugliness, the racism, the inequity, and we'll talk about that too later on. Education, the missing stories. I guess I've answered my own question, but anyways, I want to hear from the wise one. Oh, you're muted again, Lynda.
There we go.
There you go.
There we go. I couldn't get it to unmute. My Wi-Fi connection collapsed on me, so I'm now on my cell connection.
Oh.
So in a little brighter room, so it's a little better anyway. That's a tall order, Tracy. I thank you for the label of being an advocate. I really think that's a high honor. I'm finding it really interesting listening to these people because, as you know, I've been retired for 12 years now. I think the things that they're bringing forward are really, really important. And I think your comments about equity are another piece that's very important. I look back and I think it's probably only within the last 20 years that there have been any special concessions made for kids who came in as immigrants, or even kids who came in from reserves and that sort of thing. I can remember a time when school divisions said, no, if you're not living here, you're not a part of who we are, and we don't have anything to accommodate you. I can remember meeting with immigrant parents when I worked in the board office. It sort of, things would snowball, and they would go to the school and nobody would know what to do with them, so they would send them to the board office, and nobody would know what to do with them there, so they would send them to see me because I had a student services label at the time, and besides, I would probably try to do something. And I remember trying to talk to people and make some sense and make a connection, because people come in fearful. When we're talking about the need for parental involvement, these are parents who don't know how to connect with the system, and maybe doing it in another language, or have very limited English. And I can remember the empowerment for me and for a set of parents the day I realized that if I just slowed down and made lots of eye contact and didn't look intimidating and drew a few pictures and waved my hands a lot to add to things, suddenly we had some understanding and some comfort level going. And you come to realize how important that is. I think we need to realize that not all kids come to school with the same background. Your kids and my kids see things because of our connections in our well-established connections in communities. They experience things. They talk to relatives that do a variety of things. Some of these children don't have those things in their homes. They have parents who aren't able to say, well, let's talk about things that might be possibilities for you. Some of them may not have the language, be speaking a different language and not be able to do it. There are all sorts of pieces. And as I say, it's only in the last 15 to 20 years that school divisions started creating and setting aside funding to have specialists in those areas and to have programs, and to have something like the coalition that Kathleen is talking about. I mean, that's incredibly wonderful. I talked to, and I think I mentioned when you and I chatted, that I have a friend who has really done a lot of work with the government in the area of settlement and such, and now is retired and is working through her church welcoming immigrant families, and then trying to find connections with education for them. And they're not being, initially obvious ones. And these are kids who are high school level. And I'm really sensitive to the idea of, yes, how do we make sure that we keep them in the system long enough to avoid them just getting shuffled off into entry-level jobs that are never going to lead them anywhere or give them any hope of moving ahead. And I think, from my perspective, I think school divisions have very much wanted to make those connections. I know it was a very lonely place to say we need to start trying to address those things as a school division. And the whole idea of having a coalition to look at things that need to be done. Even, one of the most telling stories for me is Take Your Kids to Work Day. One year, I took one of my daughters to the office, and that was fine, except I had a pile of things going on. And then I had a school phone to say that they had 5 kids whose parents had nowhere to send them, didn't speak much English, and came with a background that their kids weren't going to have that opportunity. What could she do with them? And I said, send them over. So we ended up having them in the board office doing various things around. And in fact, I ended up getting my daughter to take them for lunch. It's ironic, she ended up a teacher. I kind of put her in charge of the group that day. And it showed that although they were the same age, she had a different set of experiences and had a different skill set. Mm-hmm. And that shouldn't be. I was very proud of her, but shouldn't be. There should be opportunities for all kids to know, to be able to see the world and get experiences so that they have a skill set that's going to put them in a position where they have opportunities for post-secondary education and good employment opportunities. And I think it's wonderful that we're taking steps in that direction. We have to. It's just absolutely vital that we keep going down those paths.
Oh, and Lynda, I wanted to ask, spilling off of Connie mentioned training for teachers, especially now, teachers today. How important is that, and what kind of training?
It's huge, and I don't know that I have the answer to what kind of training. I think a lot of the answer is having teachers have opportunities to dialogue and reach an understanding with people like the coalition and with people like some of the reserve people who would be able to identify some of the needs. But it's professional development is a huge piece of this, because teachers are fearful.
Oh, especially now. A
very good friend of mine that we were involved in something in our retirement, and there was a gentleman that came in and spoke Portuguese as his native language. But he was madly enthusiastic, and he'd want to tell stories about what he had done and how he had done it, and so on. And he'd go talking on, and she was just absolutely fearful. She said, I can't talk to him because I don't understand him. And I had enough experience in my job to know, it's a little bit like reading, where they show you as long as you can recognize 3 or 4 words in a sentence, you could figure out what it means. And if you relax enough sometimes to work with somebody who speaks little English, as long as you're relaxed enough to start picking up key words, you can get the gist of what they're saying and where they're going and have a conversation. And she just marveled. She said, how could you do that? How can you talk to I just try and avoid him. And I think that's representative. She was a dynamite teacher with every bit as much experience as I had, although in different areas. I think that's representative of what happens for a lot of teachers who come without the background and skill set, and they're fearful of what to do. They need some professional development in terms of what kinds of things can you do and what kinds of supports are going to be there for you.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. You plot one kid who has absolutely no English in a class of 20 or 25 other kids who are going concerns, and there needs to be a plan. There really does, and there needs to be some supports that are available, and that's really, really important. And I think use of technology. You talked about the pandemic, and I watched that. And same daughter that I talked about earlier is very technologically astute, and as a result, transitioned into doing online teaching almost seamlessly. Because she was doing some of it before because she had an interest. But all of her colleagues were not in the same position and did not have the same head start that she had. So I think there needs to be lots of support. I was very proud of her offering supports to people and becoming part of a support network in her school, along with some others. But they were very needed by some people. And those supports have to be put in place so that all teachers can access the information and the supports and the tools that they need to deal with a world that has such a wide range of
no doubt.
Of situations.
Yeah.
And the other one that's been a bugbear for me was when I realized that because of funding formulas that many of the kids on reserves don't get, and that's some of the muddle between federal funding and provincial funding and local funding and so on. But the dollars per capita that go to many of the reserves don't match what happens in the city. And I mean, that's just wrong. We have got to, kids have to all have an opportunity to move ahead. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Lynda. We'll get back to more conversation, but now, Lisa, I guess I want to say maybe Lisa, we've been talking about the great work the coalition does, and Lynda was recognizing that, these specialists need to come into the schools and, you know, be part of the whole education experience. And so this brings us to your position. And I think that is really special. And, you know, share what it is like and how you became the Indigenous community and culture support worker.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
You got it, Tracy.
I think if I say it once more, then it's mine, right? Then it's my title.
Apparently our school division is known for its extremely long titles in our Indigenous education team. So so thank you so much, Tracy. It's nice to be here. I'm loving what I'm hearing from Kathleen, Connie, and Lynda so far. So what was your question? How did I get involved in this?
Yeah, how did you get involved in your background?
Well, I was working in the nonprofit counseling field from about 1990 to 07. So I worked with Indigenous addictions treatments, as well as women's nonprofit organizations. So very much connected to Indigenous relatives who were involved in those types of programming, and got to know a lot of the amazing nonprofit orgs that Winnipeg has. Like, the North End is so rich, eh? It's got, you know, Mama Way and all these Indigenous programming. So a friend of mine who was a Indigenous social worker phoned me up one day and said, how would you like to come and work with the public school division? And I said, but I'm not a teacher. And she's like, you don't have to be. This is what the job is. And it's working with children. And I says, I've never worked with kids before. They scare me, I said, because I'm not a parent, eh? I was also the baby of the family. So she still teases me to this day, because this has been the longest job I've ever had, because I absolutely love it. And I love working with young people. Yeah. So that's how I got started.
So Lisa, give us an example of some of the work that you've done in the school division, and how old are the kids?
Well, okay, so in our division, there's a team of 3 of us. We have an inclusion specialist. So she is a classroom teacher and works with classroom teachers to help them include authentic Indigenous perspectives in whatever curricular area, unit plans that they're doing. And then there's another community and cultural support worker that I work with. So the inclusion specialist works more with the curriculum and the academic pieces. And the 2 support workers, we work more with the community and the cultural support pieces, because we recognize that Indigenous children, Indigenous learners aren't blank slates. Like, they come with our history, they come with our cultural knowledge and our cultural backgrounds. And that's a huge part of who they are as people. It's a huge part of their personhood. And because, partly, maybe mostly because of the relationship between this country that's now known as Canada and the Indigenous nations, when it came to education, there has been a lot of mistrust, rightly so, developed. So it's trying to build those relationships. When Kathleen was talking, you know, how do we welcome, you know, parents into our schools? I was thinking it's the same question that I have. And I know Indigenous parents want the best for our children. Of course we do. I I just think that there's some barriers there, and like I say, some lack of trust and knowing how to be involved. But what we do is we work with schools and bring in cultural components, because Indigenous peoples, we have our knowledge systems, right? We have ways of understanding math, science, geography, home ec, all of those curricular areas. We have our areas that have been with us for thousands of years. So it's trying to bring in those knowledge systems as well for the Indigenous kids, right? For the Indigenous kids to see themselves, their histories, their cultures, their voices included in their public education experiences. The programming we do is for all students, but it's specifically geared towards the Indigenous students, so that they feel culturally safe, so that they know that their language, their ways of knowing and being are going to be respected and included. And part of what our team does too is helping teachers with PD, and I hear that quite often too, about teachers being scared because they don't know. But for our team, there's not the expectations that all teachers should know everything there is to know about Indigenous peoples and cultures, because Indigenous nations are so diverse, right? Like our languages are diverse, our ways of living in relationship with the land. It's depending on where you are. Nobody can know everything about the 500 plus Indigenous nations here in North America. And we also recognize that education long back, in the past, had either an absence of Indigenous peoples, or very inaccurate misrepresentations. So I know when I was a student in Portage la Prairie in the 80s, and I would look at some of the textbooks that talked about, Native people, I just wanted to hide. I would literally slump down in my seat, because we were either wearing loincloths, or we had these, fierce, these fierce expressions, carrying an axe or a tomahawk or whatever. Like, it was very stereotype. And I'm like, that's not me. That's not my family. So there has been so much change in Indigenous education, but what we hope that teachers know is I guess that, that practice, that teaching of being humble, of that humility. It's okay not to know. We're all learning, as long as you lead with the heart. And I see some really good teachers who do. They say, I don't know how to say hello in your language, or I don't know. Can you teach me? Some of the best things I've ever witnessed in a classroom is when a teacher will ask, and as long as it's comfortable for the student, not wanting to put them on the spot, but we'll ask them to be the resident expert. They'll bring in their powwow regalia and dance, or they'll show other kids how to bead, or help with making moccasins or drums. Remember one little guy, he was like, how old are kids in grade 4? Are they 8, 9?
9.
Okay, thank you. Oh my gosh, he was this little boss. Like he totally led the class in this hand drum song. And he was confident and fearless, and he knew his stuff. He knew what those songs meant, why you sing them, how to take care of the drum. I'll never forget him. And that teacher gave him the opportunity to be the teacher, because he had that knowledge. And the teacher was learning along with the rest of us. It was amazing.
Now, can everybody attest, like, that is education now?
Mm-hmm.
I think you
I
said
think
it.
so.
You said it so well, Lisa.
Yeah.
A quick question to you. And I think, well, we did talk about it, and I want to hear from the rest of you. How important is it then now for Indigenous and newcomer communities, to students, sorry, not communities, but to see themselves as a teacher, as a principal, as an advisor, or a curriculum developer?
Well, I think any time, like, I'm sure we've all heard about the extremely saddening statistics of suicide epidemics in First Nations communities, right? I've listened to elders, parents, young people themselves. It's because they don't have, part of that is they don't have any hope for their future. They don't know what their future holds, right? Especially if systemic racism continues to portray any group with that same misinformation or downright hurtful and hateful stereotypes. You know, we're humans. We take that in. We start believing it. I believed it. I believed the lies that I was a dirty Indian, because I heard that all throughout my early years. You know, that's just part of being a human being. Is our environment, you know, can wear us down. So if our young people don't have any hope for the future, that's not a good. What do we have to live for then? Right. What do we have to live for? So it's whatever those young people dream, and it could be the trades, it could be becoming a mom, whatever their goals are. It's an important part of our community. We need them. So our job is to help them achieve their goals and dreams.
Kathleen, your comments?
Yeah, so I agree 100% with what Lisa's saying. One of the things that we see, and as the coalition we've been trying to work with school divisions for, is this idea of representation in teachers and school administrators. Are they representing the communities in which they're serving? So I think if you look at like positions or decision-making positions in the school systems, predominantly who are occupying those seats, it's not racialized communities members, it's not Indigenous community members, even though within those school systems you have such a large population of students that represent those communities. The teaching staff or administrators or superintendents don't represent that. So I think we've talked to students before where they say, if I had a teacher that looked like me, that spoke my language, that I could connect with, I know that they understand my experiences. They know what I'm feeling being a newcomer, an immigrant, or being like part of the Indigenous community. Like they understand my heritage, they understand my history. And I feel validated in those experiences. I feel like I can connect with them, I can talk with them. And they'd be able to actually listen and understand. So that's one of the things that we really want to look at is hiring and employment policies within school divisions, and even within the current system right now. It's so like the racialized communities and Indigenous communities are so underrepresented. So I think how do we, what's causing that? Is it coming through universities? Like, are there just not enough students going through universities? Are there just not enough like contracts that are permanent contract positions? Are they just like stuck in this substitute role? Are there just not enough jobs available? Is there not enough training? So I think asking those questions and understanding that and then addressing those are really key just from that beginning step, like even from the university level all the way up to employment policies within school divisions, because students say that. They say they want to see themselves represented in those that are teaching them. So I think that's a really key component to their education as well.
Oh, well, thank you. We have a question from the audience, the virtual audience, and actually it's for Lisa again. So we're speaking of the absence of Indigenous peoples in curriculum, and many of the things I've learned about residential schools was from my daughter's homework. Working in the schools today, do you notice that the curriculum is more accurate or representative than they used to be? Or is there still major misconceptions?
Thank you to that person who asked that really good question. I think as a result of Indigenous education teams like what we have in our school division, and I know that other school divisions have as well, I think that's been changing. I think there has been more inclusion of authentic Indigenous history from Indigenous voices, but there still could be more. Like there's still, it's pretty hard, especially right now, to not know about residential schools or what they all entail, just given to what's been happening in our world with missing relatives being found and brought home. But I think there still needs to be more inclusion and more work done. Also to help teachers feel more comfortable and confident in order to have those conversations and to recognize those ways of knowing in Indigenous students and have them co-teach or just like that little drummer.
Oh yeah. Connie, your thoughts on all of this, you know, seeing students being able to see themselves maybe in your position, and yes, what's been going on in the world with residential schools and more of the dark history that's coming out. How has that affected your community?
Yeah, I actually might bounce off two of the conversations that were going. And Lisa and Lynda and Kathleen, I love talking to you, listening and learning from you guys. Two kind of threads are buzzing around my head. One is just the last one, the question that was posed to you, Lisa, about content. Remember, all curriculum, and I'm going to put my history teacher's hat on, is really made up of three big threads, and one is content. So that is the meat of the stuff you're learning, right? The other one, though, is values and attitudes and skills. And in the world of history, we're really looking at skills. So let's say I'm also sharpening my students' critical inquiry skills. So a kid can say to me, hey, Miss Wyatt, we should be learning about residential schools. My Kukum was watching this on TV. So I can sharpen their critical inquiry, their historical thinking skills, along with the content. So as a teacher, I can always gap fill. It's not just content, it's skills and attitudes. And I really think in curriculum development in the last few years, developers have looked more at that. And I think that's a value because our kids, you know, we're no longer, I hope, the sage on the stage. Heck, the more I know, the more I realize how little I know. I'm the guide by the side. And you gave some great examples, Lisa. It's a gift to be learning alongside a community and alongside your kids. And I loved when you talked about that, Lisa. That's just bouncing off you. That was the one thing that was really zipping around in my head, and I might be meandering, forgive me. The other thing is, again, about giving kids a sense of place. You know, teachers have a great opportunity. You know, you always hear the thing, you can't change the climate. Well, teachers can. They can change it in their classroom every day. They can give newcomer kids voices. They can make a safe for parents. They can, I was thinking what you were saying, Lynda, about professional development. I mean, we can look at, and someone here mentioned trades. I mean, we can learn lots in academia from the trades in the way they apprentice and mentor up and coming mechanics and everything else. We can really look how we can do that. You know, I think of people like me that have been teaching for a while. We can learn from the upcoming, but we can also help guide the up and coming in-service teachers. I don't know if I answered anything you asked, but I was so interested listening to everything.
Oh, no. I mean, and you're right. I mean, I think the trades is something of like a, you know, a forgotten field, but it is really growing, and I think those are going to be the jobs of tomorrow. So
I do too, and I think the way they approach things, I also think, I mean, in academia, when you make a mistake, it's called failure. In sports, it's called practice. You know,
yes,
It's not called, it's like, oh man, you know, this is the cheesiest quote on earth, but it's Wayne Gretzky's. I love it. You miss 100% of shots shots you don't take. So let's take some shots, teachers, community workers. You're gonna miss lots of them. You're gonna hit the bar, you're gonna scrape your knees, but get up, have your community support you, and keep on going.
I've got a question here for Kathleen from a viewer. In businesses without representation/diversity, we often hear the people who are applying/qualified are the people who get the jobs. And it's very slanted towards an assumption that the racialized groups are not interested or qualified in higher positions. Has the coalition noticed much pushback like this?
I think it's something that we definitely address. I think we've talked about it from an education standpoint. We've talked about things like internationally trained educators that come to Canada, and there's not that recognition of foreign credentials. There's not that where they have to restart their education when they come here, instead of, again, us recognizing that education and that experience that they have from back home and what that can mean to our sectors here in terms of employment, and the time that it takes to redo your education if you have to start from scratch here. So and then again, falling into like things like internationally educated teachers who have to fall into things like contract positions where they're permanently in substitute positions and things like that. So I think it is something that we see. It is something that we see in the employment sector as well in terms of businesses. And then we ask those questions of, well, are you recognizing things like foreign credentials, and what is the value that you're placing on their experiences that they have and that they're bringing here to your business or to your to whatever it may be, to whatever job or sector it may be. So I think that's something that IPW has been doing as well, is really looking at through the employment sector is how do we recognize people's experiences and all of that knowledge that they bring with them when they move or migrate to Canada. Mm-hmm. And how much of that is just lost because we don't recognize it, and how do we change that narrative? So I think that is something that I think slowly has been becoming more of a conversation and bringing more of that to light. So, but there's tons of work that needs to get done on that as well. Mm-hmm. So,
thank you. And then I do have one, and I'm going to give it to Lynda. So you've been in every single job position there is in this education system, I pretty much gather. So if my children's school doesn't have appropriate cultural supports for them, how can I make the school see that it's important? And maybe Lisa, you can join in too. Where's the first point in your expertise?
I think the first point is the same as it is with any issue with the school, is go and build a connection to the school and build a relationship with people and talk to them and let them know how you're feeling and why you're feeling the way you are, and create that understanding. Sometimes it's a one-on-one with a principal, mm-hmm. Or a teacher. And these things are going to expand based on common understandings of their value, and I think that has to be built over time. It doesn't happen instantly. And culture is one facet of education. I think it was Connie that talked about, you have to remember that we're dealing with everybody as human beings, and I fear that culture, and it's really, really valuable, but I fear that I don't want to see one culture become competitive with another in a negative way. I think they all have their place in a positive way. Mm-hmm. I remember not so long ago going and listening to Barack Obama when he was in town, and one of the meaningful things he said to me was talking about recognizing people as human beings, that everything else, be it race, be it culture, be it religion, be it anything, is all a layer on top of the human being factor. And I think that's something that's really important not to forget. I fear that, and I hope I can say this right, but I think we have evolved to the point where we're starting to listen to the fact that all of the cultural components that people can bring forward are really, really important, and add a richness and a value and a connectivity between people, because we do learn from each other. My fear is that if they become something we end up battling over, that one is going to bump into another in a negative fashion. And I think Canada has a richness because it's a multicultural system that hopefully has a fundamental recognition of people as human beings. And then we need to build all the good things from all the various cultures, and recognize what each culture can bring. And I think Kathleen made a good point in terms of recognizing qualifications and such. That's how we're going to get people in at a whole variety of levels, working on things. Somebody else mentioned the idea that the trades are so very important, that they handle things really nicely. But right now, we don't take tradespeople in, other than in industrial arts programs, in as teachers. I have argued for a while that we should be able to bring people that have had a wider range of life experiences, be they cultural, be they vocational, in to be working with our kids. Sort of like in the old days when I went to school, where you didn't see a male teacher until you were in the higher grades. These things have got to change, and we've got to start putting together all the goods and looking for all the components that make well-rounded human beings, and equip them with the skills to be able to positively interact with one another.
Well, I think that you definitely have answered that question. Lisa, your thoughts, and maybe just your thoughts on your work that you've been doing. How has it affected you?
Wow. I am surprised, Tracy, at how healing it has been personally, right? For people who have experienced racism, whether it's individual racism, institutional or systemic racism, or microaggressions, you understand how that can really beat you down internally. And if especially during the formative years, as a young person, as a child, if you hear those messages, you grow up. That's part of our education too, right? Is our environment. We grow up believing those things. We grow up thinking those are true. And then if the social systems around us aren't giving us anything otherwise, we just accept that as being true. All those stereotypes. So being able to help, and that's how I see myself, as a helper, as an auntie in a way, just younger people, so that they either that they don't have to go through that, or that if they have, because racism is still alive and well in our world, help them resist it, help them get that out of their belief system, so that they know that they are beautiful, and that they are special, and that they were meant to be here, and they're meant to belong to this world. That's how this job has helped me, and that's probably a big reason why I've been in it for so long. Also, I have an awesome boss. I just gotta say that. I have an awesome boss.
Well, that is
That
key.
helps.
That is key to make you go to work every day. I'm just lastly, Connie, for you, you had mentioned earlier, like normally you think that you'll be gone by Christmas. You've been there for, I don't know, over 20 years. What is it about what you do and the community that you serve and live in that has made you stay?
I think it's two things. It's kind of a reciprocal thing. Working with youth, and Lisa and Lynda and Kathleen, you know this is the best job on earth. I mean, without a doubt. Watching kids kind of find a place and find on their meandering journey of life, and having a community trust you enough to teach their history to their kids after the legacy of residential schools. Imagine someone laying that much trust on you. It's an absolute gift that I'm forever thankful for from the community, and allowed to trip and make mistakes. And my probably the best teacher I have since I began teaching was the community lady, the elder who cleaned my classroom. She was a font of local history, and I would sit and have tea with her and leave chocolates on the chalkboard for her, and just that she would allow me to tell stories that were not in a textbook, that were nowhere else. And you could see the kids just like daisies in the sunlight, sit up in class when you'd come and talk about stories that they could all relate to. So I'm thankful for that. I think I'll give it to the community, actually.
Aww.
Why I lasted longer than Christmas.
Yeah, and I'm sure the kids there are happy too. No, I mean, everyone here tonight, there's just so much, there's a lot of work to be done, but I think a lot of good has been created. Wouldn't you agree, Lynda?
Absolutely. When I look across from the start of my career to now, the progress that's been made has been phenomenal. And yet I think, as somebody said, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And I'm just in awe of the possibilities that there are for the future. If all of these components get to become part of who we are collectively.
Oh, most definitely. No, it's so
phenomenal.
Good. Oh, it's so good. And Kathleen, the coalition keeps moving forward. What's in the future? Are you doing any more with Bill 64?
So NEC will put out a position paper in the next little bit around our involvement with Bill 64. We are working through IPW and the Social Planning Council of Winnipeg. We're working to help build and connect other community organizations that are doing advocacy work with Bill 64 as well. And just empower communities. I think right now there's like 507 delegations that want to speak about Bill 64, and that just shows you the power of community. So I think for us, it's really just empowering community to use their voice and to just have what they think be heard. And I think NEC will always do that. We always want to work from community. I really like what Connie just said about that trust. I think anyone that works within the sector, to have community trust you enough to do the work that we are able to do is just, it's very powerful, and it's a lot of responsibility. So I think we don't take that lightly. So I think for us, it's really around Bill 64, around anything to do with education or anything to do with barriers that marginalized communities are facing. We really take it with a responsibility to listen and to learn and to work with them. So we want to do what we can to empower them. So I think anything going forward will always be through that lens. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk and to listen as well and hear from these amazing ladies. So so I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you. No, thank you, everyone. It's been such an engaging conversation tonight, and it does give me hope. And I know that moving forward, with teachers, with students, with parents together to create a level playing field. You know, everybody starts together and grows through education and learning. I think we can leave the land, we can leave the world in better hands and know that. So thank you, everyone. It's been an honor and a pleasure. And have a safe and wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.